What's going on, y'all? KMBest here. Here is everything I know about Marvel Snap's draft mode and how you can crush it. Now, Snap's draft mode is not exactly like draft modes from other card games. You start by picking a group of 3 cards, and there are 7 major groups of cards that you'll see fairly regularly. They are Destroy, Boost, Ongoing, Swarm, Ramp, Move, and Control. These archetypes are all, generally speaking, the things that provide a path for you when playing Marvel Snap Draft. And the path actually does seem fairly clearly laid out. There are multiple ways to play each of those archetypes, but you still can get a sense when playing the game mode for which ones are the strongest and which ones are the weakest. The other major twist of Marvel Snap Draft is augments. As you can see right next to me, I'm showing you a Wolverine with a Wakandan tech augment. So every time he reveals, which includes when he gets blown up, his power doubles. This is an example of the kind of massive synergy plays that you'll need to make if you want to succeed in draft. My number one tip for playing this draft mode is build to go berserk. Make sure that your deck is doing something legitimately crazy with augments and synergy, or you might get run over by the people that are doing something crazier than you. The biggest difference between draft and normal quote-unquote Marvel Snap is that there is not nearly as defined a metagame, and that means there is also not nearly the presence of tech cards and answers to these sort of over-the-top synergistic decks, which makes them, to me, pretty clearly the best thing to be doing. So let's take a look at the 7 archetypes that you're going to commonly see and which ones I recommend the most. And we'll start with Destroy, which I think has the potential to high roll the absolute highest. But Destroy is not simply about playing a bunch of Destroy cards. It's built on a couple of specific things. You're looking to do things that are combo-y and over the top. I've enjoyed Nimrods, I've enjoyed Zolas, I've enjoyed cheap Nulls, I've enjoyed Deadpool, I've enjoyed Wakandan Tech Wolverine. Destroy also has a bunch of augments that are really helpful to it, such as Salvage, which destroys the weakest thing at your location and gives the card that did it +4 power. That's excellent. There's an augment that turns other cards into Wolverine. That's excellent as well. Largely, I would say Destroy has a relatively low floor, but potentially the highest ceiling in the game. And in this game mode, I think building for ceiling is worth it. Next up is Boost, and there are a couple of archetypes contained within Boost that I think are probably worth talking about in this context. The biggest thing that it's worth pointing out about Boost is that the half of Boost that is good is the Maverick stick half. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the Venus Angela Bishop half, but that's a very fair kind of almost verging into Swarm type of deck, and playing Boost with Maverick and Stick is the way in which you can do something that is truly egregiously over the top, which again is, in my opinion, the thing that's going to matter the most to you when playing this game mode. I think that Boost and Destroy are very clearly the 2 best archetypes to pick if you're starting out. But I will also say this, they are quite difficult to put together in certain ways. They're finicky, and it's not as easy to just make them happen unless you could get the exact things that you need every single time. So these are decks that are, I guess, high risk, high reward, but if you're aiming for 5 wins, I think you should make the high risk play. Ongoing, I think, is just below those 2, and it's one that I would be happy to choose basically every time. I think if you're really optimizing for win rate in this game mode and you see any of those 3, you're good to go. If you see none of those 3, that's where stuff starts to get a little bit hairy, I think. But Ongoing is an archetype that has multiple multipliers in it. Again, a lot of this game mode is about just output here. The basic fact of life here is is there's not a lot of people who are going to be able to interact with you, and so you need to focus on doing something pretty strong. Now, I will say that the reason I think ongoing is a little below the other two is I have not been overly impressed with the augments that ongoing has access to, where Boost has access to seemingly a couple of really solid augments like Wakandan Tech. I don't really think that the ongoing ones are as good, and that's really the only thing holding it back because the card pool feels strong, and there's definitely some overlap with some of the Boost stuff as well, with Captain Carter bridging you into that stuff, but largely I think it does end up coming in third place. Ramp is just okay. I don't think ramp is bad. I think it's got a pretty high floor, but I think that you're pretty unlikely to be able to go over the top of the 3 decks we just talked about. I don't have a sincere problem with ramp, but I don't think it's the world's most compelling way to play this kind of game mode. Ramp, when I tried it, was pretty much a solid functional deck that did not feel like it was ever going to do anything special unless things really lined up for it. And it felt like it was very often, if you said, I'm going to play the ramp deck, my opponent's on ongoing or destroy, I would feel like I'm probably going to be unfavored in that situation, barring something very specific. What felt like the problem to me was that there wasn't necessarily enough of a balance between ramp and the payoffs, and your augments that you really want to hit in stuff like this are like often going to be things like cost discount or ramping upwards things, and those did not feel like they made sense with how the archetype was trying to play out. There are cards that have power in this archetype, but I don't think that they end up overcoming the synergy decks. Swarm is a pretty high floor and a pretty low ceiling. I think fairly similar to ramp, where when you just start playing swarm decks, they feel like very pool one-ish kind of things, and you have a pretty low ceiling because there aren't very many augments that can make you do things that are as crazy as some of the other lists, but you also have a pretty high floor because it feels like the card pool is actually pretty limited for swarm. You're going to get like fairly similar high floor swarm decks a lot of the time, and I think that that's a pretty cool thing to do. One of the things I did notice is that Ultron Patriot is a takeable swarm deck. I don't particularly love it, but it does really lock you in that high floor, low ceiling thing, which is where I think Swarm is really starting to find its groove. That said, it's definitely not an option that feels like it's a very consistent 5-win run kind of thing. I feel like it's much more a, this is going to be okay, and then if you run into anyone who's doing combo stuff, that's when you start getting a little bit scared. Now, the last 2 options that you're going to see fairly regularly are move and control. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't think you should be picking those options. Move does not have, unless you're doing something hyper specific, the augments that Move has available to it simply are not up to the level of the augments that other classes seem to. And you can really see that when you take a look at these augments. You have these things where it's like you give something movable, you let it give the multiple man effect. And it's like, that's cool, but neither of those are as good for the move deck as the destroy augments are for the destroy deck. The use of salvage and regeneration is so much more built into how the destroy deck plays than the use of afterimage and maneuverable, because the destroy deck really only has 2 types of cards. It's stuff that they want to blow up and then stuff that blows stuff up. But the move deck has a bunch of different things. It's not just move targets and things you want to move. It's also things like Kraven the Hunter or things that already have built-in moves like Spider-Man 2099 or Spider-Punk, and you're like, oh, this is not actually helpful for me to do this. And then it's like a bunch of small stuff that doesn't necessarily want the multiple man augment, because why would you want to get that on your small stuff that's going to become big later? Not a big fan of move. Where control, I think, is just an issue of not having really meaningful cards. Like, control has this mixture of there are no augments that seem specifically built for it, and it does not have a card pool that inspires much hope. It kind of feels like the only time you're going to do well with control is when you get like Juggernaut basically, and you're like just able to do the things that Juggernaut does. But a lot of the rest of the card pool of Control is not particularly powerful, and even in a normal game of Marvel Snap would not be amazing. And this mode kind of feels like the best decks in it are stronger than some of the best decks in normal Marvel Snap because of how powerful augments can be, and I guess also because there is less interaction. And so you have this thing called Control, right? But like, it's not really full of tech cards. You know what I mean? You don't get to pick and choose the tech cards based on an expected metagame. You just have to like pick something up and be like, I hope they have something I can hit with an Enchantress or a Shang-Chi, right? Like, that's not a good space to be in right now. The other bits of advice I have are that once you're in a lane, it really does seem like you want to stick to it. I have been derailed sometimes by choosing a card that has like multiple tags on it. As far as I can tell, both the augments you get and the cards you get suggested are to some degree influenced by the cards you have already picked. The system seems to be trying to help you a little bit. But it can definitely get confused if you end up moving a little bit too far out of the archetype you started in and into another one. And it felt like whenever I was going to train wreck, it was because of that happening. And I do think that that is a really notable thing. And if I was to pick one thing I don't particularly love about draft mode, it's that. It's that I feel like I'm very much in an archetype and building a version of that archetype. And I think maybe I know what the best versions of the archetype are going to be. And I think I know what I'm trying to get. And it's just a question of if I am able to do that or not. And I think that that is like a definite thing to keep an eye on as this mode continues. It makes me feel like it was pretty much the right decision for it to be a limited time game mode, but I do think that there is like a lot to be done in this mode. It is very clearly fun and awesome, and I only worry about replayability in this kind of context, where it's like, it feels to me like the optimal strategy might just be stay in your lane every single time, make sure you're picking one of the good decks, go do that, and that doesn't necessarily scream longevity to me. I'm hopeful that I'm wrong. I'm hoping like all the comments here are just gonna be like, KM, look at this 5-0 I got with move. You said it was trash. You don't know what you're talking about. That would make me happier than anything. But I do think that this is where I'm at with my strategy for approaching the mode right now. And it's generally the space that I would think is going to be fruitful moving forward. So if I had to distill it down to 2 tips, you want to stick to boost, destroy, and ongoing, and you want to try to go as tall as possible and combo as much as you possibly can. That is the best advice I can give you after playing draft all night on day 1 of draft. I hope this is helpful to you. As always, I have been KMBest, you have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.